Right now, we have a special treat for you. We have another local author here, Diana Koppen. This is her second book that she has co-written with her sister. And her sister, unfortunately, can't be here, but Diana is here. And so she's going to talk to us about human libraries and what that is.
Good. I'm just loving, I'm seeing people that know Marion and have met her on the left. And I'm seeing people that know my mom and people that even know my niece, Rhea. And then I'm seeing people that are just here to love me, I think. And I appreciate that so much. I would like to note that it was Robin and the Spencer Public Library who invited me to share about our first book in 2022. And this led to the museum exhibit about Aunt Mary and Helen, as well as about 50 other programs that I've done since then. Spencer Library helped us to find out that we had wings to begin this amazing journey, and it is an honor to be back at this place. Now, tonight's program was rescheduled due to the June floods. I am hopeful the theme I am sharing encourages each of you to record your flood stories, your family narratives for future generations. Okay. And I'm just going to check to see if this is going to work for us. Okay. All right. Okay. Human library, a place to go and sit, talk and walk in the steps of others, even if only momentarily. Currently, as educators that I see in the room with me, we know schools are limited on historical content that can be shared with students. Therefore, it is our job to help expose our youth, as well as the people of all ages, to human libraries, and to encourage all to seek the first-hand knowledge that can be gained from diverse populations. Through my presentation today, you will not only witness how a white woman from Cylinder, Iowa, and eventually Spencer, could be so important in revealing first-hand accounts of civil rights history, and how a couple's love and devotion served as a model for relationships and how to treat others. But you will also understand the importance of taking the time to actively listen to others. Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave from Maryland, known for his anti-slavery writings in the 1800s, proclaimed, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." Throughout our lives, my sister and I witnessed the power of books and how they can inspire hope and bring about healing. We often collaborated on writings comprised of insight gained during our human library experiences with others, and shared these writings with people in need of a reminder of their impact. To bring meaning to the importance of human libraries in our lives, the two books we co-authored came from just such human library experiences. We know many of you have joined us today because of the writing of our second memoir about our parents, George and Gladys. However, it was our mother who encouraged us to write about her sister Marion, so I feel a little bit of loyalty to beginning a little bit about that book first. In 2017, at the age of 90, our Aunt Marion Helen and her husband David moved from the Minneapolis area to Spencer to return to Marion's Iowa roots. They chose Spencer because of the central location between Marion's brother in Cylinder and our mother in Spirit Lake. As an interracial couple, Marion and David in particular, worried whether a small community in Iowa would be accepting of a black man. Back in the 1970s, when Marion and David moved into their Minneapolis home, they endured fences and for sale signs popping up around them. Prior to their move to Iowa in 2017, the Minnesota house sold quickly, and they had 1 weekend to pack and move. They only had 3 small vehicles to hold their belongings, so many items were left behind. However, they made room for over 50 boxes filled with historical mementos that Marion saved throughout her life. When Aunt Marion arrived in Spencer, she gave all these boxes to us because she knew as teachers we would use her materials with our students. Even at the age of 90, she wrote these suggested lessons you see pictured here for each of her boxes. When Aunt Marion passed away in 2018, our family turned to us to write her obituary. Oh, what a special yet challenging task. We were tasked with sharing all that little dash separating the date of her birth and the date of her death encompassed. This was definitely our most important writing to task, and as Aunt Marion was 91 years old and had impacted so many. Excuse me. How could we possibly put that into a couple pages? We had one day to pour through those 50 boxes to properly share Marion's accomplishments with friends and family. To add to the challenge, Pam was in Tennessee, and the boxes were with me and Spencer. So it really was the Spencer Library that helped me to begin to scan so many pictures and the content to send to Pam. With each photo sent, Marion's narrative expanded as we juxtaposed all of our past conversations with Marion with the artifacts from those boxes. We posted Aunt Marion's obituary on the Warner Funeral Home's website. Within hours, we received the following comment. This beautifully written obituary reflects the light of a life so well lived. I did not know Marion. More's the pity. Even her obituary was forwarded to me this evening by a friend. It, like Marion, has gained a life of its own. What a life, what a woman, what a human being. Well, this quote very much echoes the sadness felt due to a missed human library experience with Marion. Because of the outpouring of the responses from Marion's obituary, we knew these primary sources contained in these 50 boxes, covering over a century of civil rights service, needed to be shared with the world. The first artifacts that caught our attention were our aunt's photos, paralleling events we had read about in school, but even as teachers, we had never seen photos like these. There were letters, journals, published articles, speeches, interviews, photos, tape recordings, and government publications, all documenting Marion's life she dedicated to human rights. We wrote and published Marion's memoir, a unique viewpoint into the civil rights movement from a Midwestern white school teacher's perspective, spanning over 90 years. Now we will tap into the human library of Marion Helland. To help you understand the reasons Marion felt this struggle was simply something she must do. Her upbringing right here in Northwest Iowa deeply molded her views. In the 1920s, our grandparents, along with one set of great-grandparents, traveled by ship from Norway to the United States in search of a great place to farm and to raise a family. Marion was born a year later in Minnesota, but soon moved to Northwest Iowa, surrounded by Norwegian traditions. But at a very early age, Marion experienced what it felt like to be different. She spoke no English when she entered her first one-room school near Wallingford, followed by one-room schools in High Lake and Seneca. Marion knew her priority was to learn English and quickly saw that learning to read was her key to success. While in school, Marion's classmates readily accepted her, but circumstances were different for her brother Orville. When Orville started school, he became the scapegoat for many of the bad things that happened, since he did not know English and could not defend himself. Therefore, these two made a pact that their little sister Gladys, my mother, would grow up with English as her first language. Thus, you see, Marion's teaching days began. Marion had many unusual responsibilities for a 6-year-old. She wrote the family checks. She served as translator on all of their business trips. And ironically, when she was in her 90s, Marion fell ill. And to regain her strength, she spent 2.5 months in a care facility. Marion worked tirelessly during physical therapy sessions. However, while in the care center, the unyielding rules of conformity mandated by the state warred with Marion's need for differentiation. Even though she jokingly noted that the women all sported the same hairdos, the cries for individuality were deafening. When asked to write a pretend check to prove she could do it, Marion affirmed she had been writing checks for her family since the age of 6. It was then that Marion asked to be on the care facility board, to advocate for the other residents. Human library sessions between the staff and the residents would have been so beneficial to all. As a young girl, Marion's world was impacted by her personal experiences as a child of immigrant parents, as well as the words she read on paper. In the 1930s, Marion's world was rocked when her teacher shared Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book about the inhumane treatment of slaves in the 1850s. Marion started to research how black people in the U.S. were currently being treated and shared her concerns with her family. It was Marion's father who wanted all Americans to witness the same freedoms that brought Marion's mother and him to the United States from Norway. He pointed out to Marion the deep-rooted, unjust treatment endured by some people in the South and warned, do not believe everything you read in those history books. Search for the full story through primary source experiences. From that day on, Marion critically examined all of her textbooks, as well as every word she heard by backing up the words with facts garnered through human library experiences. At her young age, Marion believed that once others got wind of the injustices, the problems would be rectified. However, in 1940, she read about the terrible treatment of Jewish people in her family's Norwegian newspapers, only solidifying the ongoing problems around the world. Adolf Hitler's ideas about a perfect race had infected Germany with hatred. Therefore, in her Cylinder High School valedictorian speech in 1944, oh, how I wish I could have been there, Marion used the symbolism of a twisted twig to exemplify the warped ideas of Hitler, as well as others that kept people from realizing their dreams. Listen to just part of this. As a twisted twig sometimes develops into the bent tree, spoiling the symmetry of the forest, so sometimes a twisted idea finds root in the mind of man and develops a personality which spoils the beauty of man's dreams. Following her Waldorf College graduation in 1946, Marion began her teaching career in Bode and then Davenport, Iowa, before moving to the Minneapolis area to teach. She found her avenue for pursuing equality by opening her students' eyes to discrimination. Marion encouraged her students to celebrate their individual differences, equipping them with tools to dismantle hatred and ignorance. Searching for multiple perspectives was key to the awareness of what others were experiencing. Marion creatively made every life experience a teachable moment, bringing in guest speakers to share a multitude of experiences outside the daily lives of her students. And this exposure permeated into her students' adult lives. Beyond meeting her Minnesota students' needs, Marion studied the events of the civil rights movement and contemplated ways to help. In 1964, President Johnson approved the Civil Rights Act to declare segregation and discrimination illegal. While reading her teacher newsletter, Marion spotted an advertisement titled, "Teachers Wanted to Teach Freedom." She stumbled upon the chance to teach youth how to correct the errors of the past. During the summer of 1965, as Marion approached Alabama for the first time, she noted in her journals, and I quote, "When I arrived, the countryside looks calm enough, and those of us who had never been to Alabama were pleasantly surprised at the beautiful scenery. Alabamans are especially proud of their NASA Space Center in Huntsville, where they work on the Saturn rockets." I'm going to remind you, this was 1965, 4 years before the moon landing. Marion went on to write this. So it seems they are able to contribute to putting men in space and perhaps on the moon, but have to be brought kicking and screaming to the basic idea of allowing a man into a voting booth or a perfectly qualified student into the University of Alabama if that man or that student happens to be a black citizen rather than a white one. And later in her journal, she says this. Any thought of enjoying the scenery and southern hospitality of Alabama is suddenly jarred by signs posted indicating what the human climate is like. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. White only, colored entrances. To fully understand the magnitude of the problems facing the desegregation efforts, on her first day in Alabama, Marion and the other freedom teachers sneaked into a Klan meeting at the local elementary school. Marion recalled being shocked by the discovery that, and I quote, they had records of Christian hymns playing as we marched in, and there were also young children dressed in Klan outfits. Marion filed in with the group and sat down quickly without calling notice to herself. Beyond the promised speakers noted in the ad, the prize speaker for the evening was Collie Leroy Wilkins. This man was one of 4 Klan members responsible for the shooting death of Viola Gregg Liazzo, a female activist who drove Leroy Moulton, a black teenager, back to Selma after the march to Montgomery. Marion observed, Wilkins was praised highly that night in that Klan meeting because according to them, he had done something very great. Well, Marion was not in Gadsden to judge, but rather to experience life from the eyes of those living it. Marion noted, I talked to as many white Southerners as I dared to approach. Some were friendly, but would not discuss the problem. Some were sympathetic and warned me to be careful. But the majority let me know they disliked outsiders and would have no more to do with me. After the summer of teaching at the Freedom School to explain the movement to her Midwest students, Marion mailed letters to her Minnesota students describing her time in the South. Here's a part of that letter. I wanted to know what the civil rights movement was like, looking at it from the inside rather than just reading about it. Also, I wanted to talk to both blacks and whites in the South and hear from them what their ideas are like, what their lives are like, and what their ideas are. The following summer, in the June of 1966, in support of the black voting efforts of the previous summer, activist James Meredith scheduled a 220-mile walk from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi to demonstrate if such a feat could be accomplished by a black man. Unfortunately, Meredith barely crossed the Tennessee state line before he was shot. However, through the encouragement of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the march continued, with Meredith joining the others after he was released from the hospital. When school concluded for the summer, Marion headed from Minnesota to Mississippi to join in the march. After the march, Marion opened a freedom school in Columbia, Mississippi, where visits by the Klan included numerous slashed tires, as well as an attempted cross burning on her front lawn. However, these actions did not deter Marion from her mission of registering adults to vote, teaching the youth, and desegregating areas then deemed open to all, regardless of color. Marion again sent a letter in 1966 to her next class of Minnesota students, sharing the following, and here's part of that letter. My class of teenagers and I went for a picnic in the White Park one day. The police came to watch us. All the white people in the park scurried off, except some children who continued playing normally until their mothers drove up and hurriedly hauled them away. After each summer of service, Marion returned to Minnesota, questioning how people could ignore what was going on in the South. She continued to work with the civil rights movement alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and kept all the letters from Dr. King, suggesting peaceful ways to instill change. Unfortunately, Marion also experienced the moment in April of 1968 when Dr. King traveled to Memphis, Tennessee to peacefully advocate for better conditions for sanitation workers and was shot and killed. Prior to his death, MLK had initiated the Poor People's Campaign, a peaceful way to bring about awareness to the poor living conditions of so many people. Even though MLK was gone, the Poor People's March went on as planned. Marion took a 17-hour bus trip across the country from Minnesota to Washington, D.C. to take part in the daily demonstrations. Marion stayed in these boarded tents for nearly 2 months. Marion's fight for human rights continued to expand beyond her classroom as she participated in and implemented numerous programs throughout the Midwest as well as across the nation. She served as a mentor to so many. One of her mentees that we did a Zoom meeting with, I wish that Marion could have heard this. Here's what she said. Marion fought for human rights even though, as the mentee bluntly put it, Marion did not have to do that. Marion used her white privilege to make a change and was passionately engrossed in the work she did for people who did not have a voice. After retirement, I say that word retirement loosely, Marion not only spoke out for indigenous rights within AIM, but also mentored middle schoolers, teaching them the essay writing process, recognizing the many living narratives needed to be heard from the indigenous community, and wanting to equip the youth with the ability to put their ideas down on paper. In 2002, Marion noted, the country is polluted by racist talk, with Minnesota alone averaging over 200 hate crimes that year. Therefore, Marion organized herself rehab to rehabilitate convicted offenders of hate incidents. Through the program, probation officers contacted Marion, and she in turn met with the individuals, ranging from elementary school age to age 40. Despite being a 100-pound woman in her late 70s, Marion's demeanor and life experiences made the program a success. Her non-judgmental approach allowed offenders the freedom to talk openly, giving her access to the parts of their minds open to change. Well, the 21st century was a time of receiving numerous awards. One of Marion's awards came from Marion's alma mater, Waldorf University. I would like to read an excerpt from our book, the first book, about this ceremony in Forest City, Iowa. In 2015, Marion, at the age of 88, and her family ventured to Forest City, Iowa, where Marion's alma mater named her the recipient of the Waldorf College Alumni Distinguished Service Award for her relentless contributions to human rights. Being awarded the Waldorf Award was extra special to Marion because David, as well as her sister Gladys and brother Orville, and their spouses and children were in attendance. Marion expressed how this acceptance speech marked the first time she was very nervous about giving a speech, wanting it to be perfect for her siblings, coupled with the fact that she was at her alma mater. Well, Wayne and I were in attendance at this award ceremony, and as part of Marion's introduction, the gentleman attempted to list Marion's decades of accomplishments, and that list was spectacular. After being introduced with a commentary of all of Marion's accomplishments, Marion utilized that somber face we were used to, and she was dubbed with possessing in high school, and started the speech with, kind of tired after listening to all that introduction. Aww. Marion's unique humor always gave us smiles. This past October 2023, my other sister Kathy and I, along with our spouses, received in Marion's honor the Iowa Woman of Achievement Award that honors historic Iowa women. Marion is one of only 23 honored with a name plaque on the Iowa Woman Achievement Bridge in downtown Des Moines. We highly recommend visiting this bridge to read about these amazing women and continue to read about the yearly additions to the bridge, honoring the narratives of so many worthy Iowa women. And our most recent exciting news has been the request for Marion's 50 boxes, down to 22 now, to be added to the University of Iowa Women's Archives for research purposes. A representative from the University of Iowa is coming to Spencer on November 5th to add these to their collection. After publishing our aunt's memoir, Breaking Free from Rigid Boxes from the Outside Looking In, we do another captivating story about our mother, our Aunt Marion Helen's younger sister Gladys. When praising Marion for her heroic actions and widespread impact she has had on society, Marion scolded me, and this is where I think she was telling me it's time for another book. She wasn't alive, but that's the message. Here's what she said to me. I admired your mother so much more. She has not only helped mold the minds of impressionable youth for over 50 years as an educator, but also has passed on her fine qualities to 5 daughters and their families who are now in the world serving as well. That is the vision of a true hero. So these 2 sisters had different lives, but they each saw a hero in each other. I just love that. My niece, and this would be Pam's daughter, she not only designed the cover of Marion's book, but she also designed the cover that you're seeing up on the screen too of our new book. I'll get that switched here. Oops, I got it back. Hang on a second. But in our latest memoir, had previously created the painting on the front cover as an anniversary gift to her grandparents, my parents. In the front, this is actually Memorial Park if you've been in Spirit Lake, and her grandparents, my mom and dad, are seated on the bench. They're down at the end by the river, by the lake, I should say. The back cover, most fittingly, contains a photo of Dad's Bronco overlooking Big Spirit, taken by another granddaughter, Macy Harms. Many Spirit Lake people remember Dad driving this around the lakes region. My sister Debbie and her husband now have this Bronco and can continue that tradition. Beyond the impact that our mother had on our lives and the lives of others, we also witnessed firsthand the selfless devotion of our father, who loved our mother so profoundly that nothing kept him from his side. Our second memoir, Crossing the Threshold, a love story unparalleled, encompasses a love story unveiled through a sampling of narratives shared during our human library sessions with our parents. Throughout our lives, and especially during our parents' final years. Forever yearning for one more anecdote or glimpse into the lives our parents have built, we hope to capture the essence of our parents' spirits in a novel that our loved ones can hold and turn back to. In the Bible, the number 7 symbolizes completion, perfection. George Barnard Ducey Jr. graced this earth on May 20th, 1931, the 5th son of George Sr. and Cecilia Lendway Ducey, making this, their family, a perfect 7. When the Duceys entered their farmhouse with their new bundle of joy, baby George's 4 big brothers instantly gave him the moniker Junior. Junior and his brothers helped their father operate the family farm, while Cecilia kept the household of her 5 sons in order. I can't imagine. The boys attended school during the winters, but each year spent much of spring, summer, and fall working in the fields. Junior enjoyed school and left no person a stranger, loving to socialize with others, which I know comes as no surprise to those people that know my dad. Junior's family always came first in his eyes. Consequently, during his high school years, he juggled working on the family farm, I love this picture, competing in sports, and completing his classwork. After graduating from high school, George ensured that his parents were frantically secure before moving to Titonka, Iowa to run a gas station. In Titonka, George dropped the moniker Junior and started forming his identity as George. 4.5 years after George's birth, and just a few miles down the road, Gladys Kathleen Hilland was born in Esterville, Iowa, on December 19, 1935, to Olaf and Margaret Kumla Hilland. As one set of grandparents lived with them too, the birth of Gladys completed the extended Hilland family's perfect 7. Hard work, dedication, sacrifices, family love, and Norwegian culture became ingrained within Gladys. After graduating in 1954 as salutatorian, Marion was valedictorian, you can see what I have. Gladys pursued her high school dream to become a teacher and attended Waldorf College, following in her sister Marion's footsteps. During her college days, like clockwork, Gladys's father picked her up each Friday night and brought her back to campus each Sunday afternoon, allowing Gladys to spend her weekends at their Cylinder farm. And Robin, my mom, continued to do that for me when I was missing home from college. All of us girls. And I never never once said, oh, just stay there. Shortly after crossing the graduation stage in 1956, Gladys, accompanied by Marion, who had been teaching for 10 years, went on her first interview for an elementary teaching position in Titonka, Iowa. Gladys later shared that, counter to typical interviews today, Marion went into the interview with her and did most of the talking. Does not surprise us at all. Gladys was hired on the spot and accepted her first teaching position in Titonka, just a short year after George's move there. Apartments were non-existent in Titonka, so Gladys rented a small room in a house. After Gladys's parents dropped her off with all her earthly belongings, loneliness took over as she looked around the small space she now called home. Since she did not have a car, she spent her first days in her room, eagerly awaiting the start of the school year. She yearned to converse with her students and start making connections in the community. And soon she did just that. She immediately befriended another young single teacher who fortunately had a car. Beyond her friend, the hospitable staff at the school helped Gladys feel at home. Halfway through her second week in Titonka, the school secretary asked Gladys to go out for a soda at the local cafe because she wanted Gladys to meet George, who ran one of the town's gas stations and also rented a small room in a house nearby. In exchange for a minute fee and a nightly human library experience, he had convinced this older woman living in the house across the street to cook each evening meal. After supper time, George typically headed uptown to the pool hall to play cards with the locals, the main form of entertainment for the residents of Titonka at that time. Per Gladys's upbringing, a pool hall would not be an appropriate place for her to meet friends. So that night, George went to the cafe instead. After their first meeting, George silently vowed to live his life right, so he would be worthy of Gladys's hand. On Gladys's birthday on December 19, 1958, George proposed. In August of 1959, George and Gladys married. As a symbol of their commitment, they recited their vows and used these words as a steadfast framework for their lives together. The couple eventually moved to Spirit Lake and formed their perfect family of 7. The importance of family transcended to the new generation of Duceys during our human library experiences with our parents and their families. Beyond owning in Spirit Lake and running Ducey's mobile and country store, Dad took on another financial responsibility: snow pushing. This time became family time as we took turns riding along on his many jobs. We vividly remember the numerous conversations we had in the front cab of that Bronco as Dad cleared St. Mary's Catholic Church parking lot in particular after each snow, all the while directly across the street from the Catholic Church, Dad privately eyed a spacious house positioned on a huge lot. With the expense of entertainment for a household of 7, a ride around Spirit Lake often served as fun family adventure. On these nightly trips, Dad would stop in front of older, rundown houses, making jokes telling that he had purchased that house. Dad and Mom would laugh. "Oh, George," Mom would say. Well, one afternoon, Kay knows where this is going. One afternoon, our car took us past St. Mary's Catholic Church, and Dad stopped our car in front of 911 Gary. Per usual, Dad announced he was purchasing this house to fix up. And at first, Mom just laughed and said, "Oh, George." But even we girls in the back seat could tell that Dad was not joking this time. He had visions of returning that old house to its glory of so many years past and utilizing the spacious yard for outdoor time with his girls. Nevertheless, Mom just saw this house as a ramshackle mess. Tears fell from her eyes, which tugged at Dad's heart. He promised her he would just fix it up, and if Mom didn't like it, they would just sell it. Reluctantly, Mom agreed to this plan. Dad then began remodeling this house during his spare moments. A few months of dedication and vision later, Dad had transformed that old, dilapidated shell of a building into a house fit for his queen and her princesses. With Mom's approval, we packed all our possessions and moved across town. Mom quickly converted the house Dad had remodeled into a home for our family, a treasure Mom would fight hard to call home for the rest of her life. We each married and had our own children. Look in the middle at Truman's face. You always have that one who makes getting a good photo difficult. And ironically, it would be Truman's mother, Kathy, who made faces in all of our family photos going on. Beyond family visits, Mom and Dad treasured their time together, even stepping back in time in Grandpa George's Senior's 55 Chevy. And now Pam and her husband have this car in Memphis to enjoy. Oh, and it's a good story in the book of how that car got to Memphis. Well, when people least expect it, life can throw them off course, breaking the comfortable routine. For years, our parents actively listened to our every need, but the perspectives of our human library sessions transitioned to our parents' needs. That large house at 911 Gary seemed to us to be a lot for them to maintain. So we formed visions of our parents in a nice small house versus our big family home. But we quickly learned that was not Mom's vision. 2018 hit hard. First, Mom was plagued with illness, and then Dad, and then Mom, stripping them of the time together as they rehabilitated at the local care center. After Mom's last illness, Dad fell and fractured his hip. So he joined her at the care center while his hip healed. Dad recovered faster than expected, serving as a double-edged sword for us. On the day the doctor granted permission for Dad to put weight on his hip, Dad, determined to be able to help Mom once more, got up and walked with the walker as if he had never missed a step. He transitioned his therapy to assisting Mom by pushing her, using her wheelchair handles as his crutch, down the hall to each meal, and helping her with tasks around the room. We continue to search for ways to bridge the gaps in our parents' uprooted lives. Unfortunately for Pam, over 850 miles separated her from them, making frequent in-person visits impossible. Therefore, knowing the health benefits of laughter, Pam mailed daily letters filled with funny memes and cartoons. Pages Mom requested to be put in 3-ring binders for all visitors to enjoy. Besides letters, we made daily phone calls where Dad began each conversation with the same opening. "Glad your first, second, third, fourth, fifth daughter is on the phone." After a few words, he handed the phone to Mom, who was waiting patiently to hear our voices. After months of medical ups and downs for Mom, She had a wonderful February in 2020. At the Care Center's Valentine's Supper, Mom read the place-setting name tags displaying George Ducey and Gladys Ducey. And she turned to Dad, asking him when had they gotten married. Due to a snowstorm that weekend, George and Gladys had their alone time to bring back all the memories and erase Gladys's months of confusion, because for a while she was calling me Marion. And it just so much, all this explained it, why. They had their alone time to get back the memories and erase Gladys's months of confusion. Dad passionately walked Mom through their love story, 64+ year of narratives, as the Gladys he once knew slowly came back to him for a beautiful February for us all in 2020. But in March of 2020, Dad knew he had to let Mom go. He reassured her that he would be there for their daughters. Even though Dad could have moved back home over 2 months prior, he wouldn't leave that care center until he could walk through the doors with her and take her home, just as he had promised her each time they walked by those doors on their way to the lunchroom for meals. But this time, as the funeral home attendee, respectfully proceeded down the hallway of the care center with Mom, Dad bravely walked beside her as they crossed the threshold together. Once at the door, Dad told Mom he promised to take her home, and he couldn't think of a better home. Well, days after Mom passed, the world shut down due to the national COVID mandates. COVID hit all of us so hard, but especially the elderly, who were robbed of their final years. My niece and Pam's daughter, Dr. Jaden Gracie, a radiation oncologist, asks her terminally ill patients what their final wishes in their final months are, and then she contacts those family members to help bring these wishes to fruition. So many patients state they want to visit their previous homes. Well, just days before COVID mandates hit, we jumped in the car with Dad and took a ride down memory lane, where the visuals cemented all the past stories he had shared through the years. Ironically, though, the timing to get Dad home, it was perfect, because he escaped being in the care center during a time when COVID-19 pandemic hit residents of nearby centers. However, it was also horrible timing. Dad desperately needed to reunite with his friends, but instead he was trapped in his house for the lockdown, unable to see others. Daily through phone calls, he heard about one friend after another losing his or her life to COVID, and nightmare messages about his friends at the care center, only receiving visitors through the windows as loved ones sat outside. Well, in the wake of Mom's death, Dad's only communication with the outside world was via telephone conversations with his friends and relatives, as well as phone calls. Zoom calls became fun, letters, and food deliveries from us. We wore masks and stayed our distance in the kitchen while he remained in the living room and away from the possibility of contracting COVID. These home visits, albeit short and limited, kept Dad's spirits up despite his longing for a hug. When the threat of COVID finally subsided, Dad slowly made his way back into a world much changed due to the multitude of friends lost. COVID had hit so many so hard, but especially the more vulnerable elderly population. Besides trips around town with us and long visits to the cemetery, Dad ventured across the street to church each weekday to avoid the weekend crowd. Since Pam is not here, I would like to read one of my favorite passages from our newest book that Pam experienced with Dad. On the first weekend Mass they attended, Pam and her dad took up his favorite spot in the back church pew. They soon heard a resounding, "George!" coming from behind, as Dr. Don caught a glimpse of his long-lost friend. Well, Dad's expression was priceless as Pam's thoughts dashed back to our young days. and getting the look if we made the slightest peep in church. Well, Pam soon discovered that when you are in your 90s and you have been robbed of precious time, it is acceptable to call out your buddy during a church service. My favorite story. In the winter of 2022, Dad noticed a decline in his energy level, sending him back to the confines of a care center to regain his strength. While in the center, he fractured his hip. Even on his, he took on his physical therapy as a personal challenge that he would conquer. Coupled with enduring another 6 weeks of not being able to put any weight on his hip, even though he had followed all the rules, then Dad contracted COVID. During his 10 days of isolation, he was moved to solitary confinement at the end of one hall, where his only direct contact with people was with care center staff, masked in plastic gowns and gloves, quickly tending to his basic needs. Through telephone conversations, we knew Dad was longing to be with people once again. Well, Pam traveled from Memphis to visit Dad. Dressed in COVID protocol gear and armed with all his favorite snacks, Pam made her way down the long corridor to his secluded room and past the plastic drape across his hallway entryways to keep his COVID germs from spreading to other residents. Pam eagerly lifted the plastic back at his entrance and spotted Dad with the biggest smile on his face. They talked for hours as Dad continued to share stories from his past. Again, those who knew Dad also knew he never ran out of stories to share.
She surprised him?
He did know she was coming. Yeah. 2 months later, we did a Spirit Lake Library presentation sharing the publishing of our first book, as well as taking time to honor Mom for her years of teaching. And this became Dad's homecoming celebration, reuniting him with so many people, as well as all of his daughters. He had worked tremendously hard all winter, building up his strength for this very special gathering. We spent the weekend cruising around Spirit Lake, as we so often did, while he exclaimed to all his friends that he was leaving the care center and was going home. He chose the path around the lakes area that weekend, which was filled with narratives as we drove by many of his friends' homes. At the end of the weekend, with the biggest smile on his face, he shared that he had prayed to God that he would live long enough to honor his Gladys one more time. So his life was now complete. Well, a few days later, on April 13, Dad gained his independence and returned to 911 Gary Avenue. But it was only 4 days after this move home that Dad peacefully passed away, having shared with us sisters the greatest gift a father can give, to love our mother. This photo, taken by Rachel Poncelet of Spirit Lake, has a very special story connected to it that is also revealed in our book. Our human narrative sessions not only filled the pages of another memoir, but also filled our lives with memories. On Christmas Eve of 2023, each of our sisters, their husbands, and our nieces and nephews received a surprise package with our book within, documenting our many years of human library experiences to have and to hold. During her years at Waldorf College, Aunt Marion experienced gas rationing, which I suppose our generation can parallel to experiencing shelves stripped of toilet paper during COVID-19. Years from now, our youth will not have experienced COVID masks and isolation. So much history will be lost without primary sources, human library experiences. I encourage you to share your flood stories. We each are human libraries for this event. Through our writings, we continue to stress the value of actively listening to one another, to reveal the lessons that lie within the dash between one's birth and death, before the opportunity has passed. Through conversations transcribed onto paper, so much family and community history can be preserved forever within our books. The release of our newest memoir has sparked many conversations and memories across the Lakes region, helping reveal the very qualities, its lakes, beauty, and hospitality that drew our mom and dad here so many years previously. Very few how-to guides exist to show us how to be a good role model, spouse, parent, or children to our elderly parents. However, first-hand accounts help pave the way. There are so many family histories out there begging to be preserved. Human Library, a place to go, sit, talk, walk in the steps of others, even if momentarily. It's been a pleasure sharing some of our Human Library stories with you. Pam always likes to point out that she's much younger than me. And there are places that will forever speak to our souls. And when we return, whisper, welcome home. Any questions? Any questions for me?
We sat behind the doozies many, many times.
And we were very well behaved.
It was the youngest one, maybe not as much.
We won't tell Janine you said
No.
that.
Oh, we were tired by then.
How long did it
Yeah.
take to write the book
Oh,
from
you
start
know
to
what?
finish?
Marion's book took us, oh goodness, 3 to 4 years. But there was a lot of research for that. And when I went to the Iowa Women of Achievements Award for Marion a year ago, October, I didn't know anything about a book. And Pam, I think she thought I needed just to complete that part of the whole journey. And she called and she goes, I've started a book. Do you want to try to make it by Christmas? And she had so much of it done. But what she sent to me, then I could add stories that she didn't think of. But something she had done, when Mom and Dad were in the care center, there was a time that I called Pam in Memphis and said, Pam, this is just really, really hard. And her response was, but you're there. And so I started texting everything that was going on, all my thoughts, what Mom said, everything. And she has saved those. So it made it really easy to add my part to it when she had my words there. But I think we were always writing stories along the way for Mom and Dad, so to put it together helped. It was just adding those last few years. So we started a year, October, and we sent it to our sisters for Christmas. But thinking again, it was just going to be them that would get this book. But they thought it needed to be more too. They saw some value in others that are going through caregiving that would especially like that part of the book. Oh, Robin, what a good turnout.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Diana. Again.
And both these books are here in the
Yes.
library to check out. That if you want your own copy, I have that too. And some brought their book. I'd like to sign it. Yeah.
Do you have a pen?
I do.
I can grab you.
Yeah, maybe grab. I thought I.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming. Drive safely. Enjoy the beautiful weather while it lasts.
Thank you, Diana.